as a child, the big thing was communism versus the free world. My family had Russian roots. We never talked about them because my grandmother came here illegally and she did not want to go back to Russia under communism. Today, the big issue is Islam versus the Western world. And we approach this new other with all the hostility that we approached communism once upon a time. We find nothing good in it. We're willing to demonize it, blame it for all of the problems that we face. All Muslims are evil. All Muslims are violent prone. All Muslims hate us. In 1219, when the Christian world went back to the Holy Land for yet another crusade, Francis and one brother accompanied the Crusaders on a boat to Egypt, to Damietta. There, Francis tried to preach to the Crusaders and get them to back off on their violent approach, and they laughed at him. And they went into battle, and they were slaughtered by the Sultan, Malik al-Kamil. After the slaughter, Francis and this one brother crossed what you might consider the demilitarized zone into the Muslim camp, were captured by Muslim guards, beaten, and taken into the presence of the Sultan. The Sultan was a very well-educated man, versed in theology, philosophy. He traveled with Sufis who were his chaplains. He discussed theology on the battlefield. When he saw Francis, we might guess even, that he saw someone very much unlike the cardinals in their fine garb that he was used to hearing about, if not seeing. He saw a ragged little man that was very much like some of the Sufis. And listened to what Francis had to say, which in the beginning may have been, you should convert and believe in Jesus. And then Francis, a man who all of his converted life, the 20 years or whatever of his life since he had converted from being a spoiled rich child, had been learning how to listen to others, listen to the Sultan, and quickly the two of them realized they were talking about the same God. And instead of trying to convert one another, Francis stayed in the camp long enough that we have to assume they must have been talking about something else. He stayed there a number of days, perhaps even 2 weeks. When he left, the Sultan gave him gifts, wanted to give him many gifts, including gold. And the only thing he would accept was a bill of passage through the Holy Land, a passport, you might say, and a horn of an ox that was used as a trumpet that Francis thought he could use when he wanted to call people together to preach. They left as, if not friends, at least people who respected one another. And the respect that they had for one another came from listening well, to recognizing the goodness in one another. Francis went back to Europe impressed by the 5 times a day Muslims come together at the call of the muezzin and pray. And perhaps much of the emphasis that followed on the Angelus, the ringing of the bells 3 times a day, comes from Francis saying, I saw this in the Holy Land and this was really good. We need to learn from these people. And we have to believe that the Sultan learned a more human, virtuous side of Christianity. This image tries to depict the spiritual bond between the two men. Sociologically, a dirty beggar from the West, no matter how holy he was, would not have embraced the Sultan. Nor would they even have been on the same level. The Sultan would have remained on a pedestal, on a platform. But this is a spiritual image, an image that shows the two men finding in each other equals before God. In Islamic art, it's well known that Muslims forbid images and the worship of images. They consider most religious imagery idolatrous, and under the worst of interpretations, destroy religious images of other people. But there have been times during the history of Islamic culture, where what we would consider Old Testament prophets or archangels are depicted in manuscripts. And when they are, this type of flame is placed behind the holy person to represent the presence of God within their hearts. Christians for centuries have used a round shape around the head to depict the same thing. In putting the two types of halos together, the flames and the round circle, I am showing that there is one holiness that comes from one God. That Islamic holy people are not different in holiness than Christian people are different in holiness. That if they're holy, they are similar because God is one. Part of the legend that grew up after Francis's death, where basically Franciscans were challenged to clean up our act because we were threatening to the institutional church with our insistence on poverty, and the church as an institution was very wealthy. People like St. Bonaventure wrote official lives of Francis that downplayed his friendship with the Sultan. And in the language of myth, this confrontation became a challenge between Francis and the Sultan, that they would build a fire, and whosoever holy men would walk into the fire and not be burned would prove the rightness of their faith. Francis supposedly was willing to walk into this fire to prove that Jesus was God. Raising the flames from that level of challenge, where you're basically saying, my God can beat your God up, to this symbol of holiness, is another way of diffusing an earlier myth in the light of the challenges we face today, the documents we're discovering today about what really happened during Francis's visit, and our own desires this day, in this time, to make peace as friars, as Franciscans, with the other that has been demonized by our culture.